In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains builds, operates, and maintains electric transmission infrastructure, connecting consumers to lower-cost energy sources to power our energy future. That means safe, secure, reliable electricity for those we serve. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.
Welcome to the Kansas Legislature right here on Smoky Hills PBS. I am your host this evening, Becky Kaiser. We're live from the studio in downtown Bunker Hill, and we're so glad that you are joining us this evening. I want to say thank you to our partners on the show, ITC Great Plains and also the Docking Institute of Public Affairs at Fort Hays State University. Thank them for their help with the show. Again, I'm Becky Kaiser, and I work in the news department with Eagle Communications in Hays, work as a reporter for both Hays Post and also Hays radio stations. We have some great legislators with us this evening that I'm going to introduce, and then we'll find a little bit more out about them and what they've been working on and what they see coming up. And don't forget, you're part of this show as well, and we encourage you to give us a call whether you have a question of the legislators or you may have a comment about something. It's a toll-free number that you can call, 1-800-337-4788. First of all, let's meet directly across from me this evening Representative Christina Haswood, who of course is a Democrat from Lawrence, the southeastern portion of the city, District Number 10, and she is pretty much new and one of our youngest legislators. So Christina, for people maybe who don't know you, and again, thank you for coming out here to this portion of western Kansas. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I will introduce myself in my native language. Christina Haswood Yinishe, Torachi Ninishla, Lebathlajin Bashash Ajatabahan Dashache Kia Aniashnella. So I'm Christina Haswood. I'm Diné Navajo, and we're located in the Arizona side. I'm Bitterwater, born for the Black Sheep people. My maternal grandparents are of the Zuni Edgewater, and my paternal grandparents are of the Towering House people. So that is who I am as a young Navajo woman. I am starting my third year in the Kansas Legislature, so I still consider myself a baby legislator. And I'm not the youngest. I think the youngest might be 24, and I'm 28. So it's been a interesting experience. Probably one of my favorite jobs that I've ever had. And I sit on the committees of Fed and State, Health and Human Services, and Taxation, and the Joint Committee on State and Tribal Relations. And
you are working on a PhD, is that correct? Did I hear you say that?
Oh, no, that's my partner.
Okay.
I don't know if I want to get a PhD or I get pushed a lot to law school too, so I don't know. But I did just graduate before getting tapped to run for office in 2020, so I'm a COVID graduate as well, graduated in my childhood living room.
All righty. Well, we go from fairly new legislator, fairly young, to a more seasoned legislator who's been a familiar face on the show, and I've met Susan before. Of course, we're talking to Susan Colcannon, who's a Republican from Beloit, that's District 107, and you are one of the longest serving legislators, Susan.
Yeah, I'm in my 11th year, so my 6th term. There are just a handful, less than 10 legislators who have been here longer than me. Of the 54 that came in with my big freshman group back in 2013, I think there's 7 of us left. So, it shows that we really do have a big turnover and not necessarily needing to have term limits.
Tell us a little bit about the committee work that you do, what you're on, and what you're working on currently.
So I serve on appropriations. I've been on that committee for several years. I love being on there because you kind of get an oversight of all of the work being done in all the committees. I chair a committee called Child Welfare and Foster Care. Formerly it was Children and Seniors. And so we do a lot of foster care work, obviously, in that committee. And then I also serve on judiciary. There's a lot of child welfare issues that overlap into the judiciary process.
Yes.
So, and I'm very interested in health issues, and that's been a good place for me on judiciary as well. My big focus has been with the committee that I chair, things that I've been working on have been mostly surrounding the foster care system.
And that has been not only the focus of attention for you and the legislature, but in the media and among residents. We've heard some not very positive things about the foster care system in Kansas. We don't have a really good reputation for, haven't had anyway, but there's been changes and we're working towards improving things, including, I think it was last year, we were looking at a kind of a Bill of Rights for foster care children themselves.
Yes, absolutely. That did not pass last year. We are looking at maybe running it next week. We lost a really beloved legislator last year, and so we have named the bill. This was her bill, and that was Representative Gail Finney from
yes.
Wichita. And so we've named it the Gail Finney Memorial Foster Parent Bill of Rights. It's kind of a long name, but it's very meaningful to a lot of us. And hopefully her family will be in Topeka next week and will be recognized, and then we'll run that bill. So yeah, we've done that, and then we've instituted an oversight committee, and through that oversight committee we've been able to find some gaps in the system and be able to target that with legislation, and we are making some improvements. You still see some stories in the paper, especially one of the contractors that covers this part of the state, and for it to make the news it's going to be bad news. So you know, we're working on it, and there are new contracts coming out, so we'll see whether they're back or not. But as it is now, we're working a lot on prevention, and we're down 1,000 kids from where we were.
So those are positives.
Yeah, we've made some movement.
I noticed also that I think this was some activity that occurred earlier this week, that there are discussions about, apparently Kansas, generally a judge is the final say where a child will go, and I think it's been traditional that is probably the biological family, but we're seeing that maybe that's not the best, and there's some discussion about maybe the judge shouldn't have the final say, that there should be some opportunities for something else.
For an appeal process.
Appeal process.
Yeah. In order to do that, we do have a bill below the line, you know, that's passed out of committee, and what we call below the line are the bills that are out of committee and waiting to be debated on the House floor. You know, in order for us to change this system to that degree, I'm hoping that we have an opportunity to hold more hearings on that issue, the issue of appeals. And the reason why is there needs to be a quick resolution when we're talking about a child placement, because they need the stability. And you know, once you start in the appeals process, that can drag on for years. So at this point now, the district court is the final say on an adoption. And that's what this bill addresses, is whether or not it should be, have the opportunity for appeal or not. Now, the part that you discussed on whether it's family or what we call kin placement, or the other term that we use is attachment. So the foster family that's become very attached to the child. Mm-hmm. At what point does that attachment become family? And so we're looking at, we have some legislation that addresses that.
What week are we in now?
I believe week 11.
Week 11. And how there is you're working under a deadline, basically, right, Christina?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So these things have to be pulled together and kept at the forefront. Speaking of the foster care system, and I don't know if this was part of the testimony this week, but I did read earlier today that our DCF Secretary Laura Howard was talking about, and you mentioned that we had fewer kids in the foster care system. She has said that that's due in part to better community support and that we need more of that. So what is community support? How do we improve it and how do we get more of it?
I'd be interested in knowing what she was referring to there. The most important thing that we need from the community are foster homes. We've lost about 300 foster homes in the last couple of years. And so, we need to bring more family into that network. We also, when we passed a juvenile justice reform bill a few years ago, it's keeping young people out of prison or jail, but we left them, the judges then, with no resources as to where they should go. And they don't have a place to send them, so they're just sending them to foster care. And foster care is not set up to be therapeutic. So some kids are coming into the system that are maybe just there because of truancy, but they're not coming in for neglect and abuse, which is what the foster care system is for. So we're discovering now that door to come into foster care is too wide open, and we need to narrow that. And to do that, we need to have programming set up in the communities. So we've put a significant amount of money. I believe the number was around $500 million into establishing that type of programming throughout the state. We're seeing that this is the reason why we have kids that are running away, because there are other problems there. It could be mental health, could be handicaps, but they don't belong in that system, and so we're working towards something different to help that age group of kids, like between 13 and 18.
Christina, this is somewhat related, but in a different vein, if you will. There was a meeting earlier this week that was instigated by the University of KU University on their medical organization, talking about the need for more nurses, nursing profession, and all that comes with that, different levels and degrees of that. Apparently, Kansas is nearly in a crisis with not having enough healthcare workers, particularly nurses.
Yeah, I've also heard we had a lot of, not a lot, but several students from KU Med come and do lobby days, which is really cool when we get to hear from folks who are impacted by all these issues personally to tell us the ground level stories. And they were saying that there's not enough residency placements, so somehow we need to fix that within the system, especially with getting more physicians in rural areas, that Kansas doesn't have enough places of residency. So we can fund as many dollars to this program, but we have to create residency programs within the hospitals. And interesting enough, I had a medical student come to me saying that she did her rotations in a rural area and saw that people were driving 3 hours just to go to Wichita. And I assume this is probably this area as well for care such as maternal care. So we had a couple bills come up with reproductive health that really kind of showed me when she sat in front of me just how important we need to invest in our preventative resources. As with foster care, if we can try and address the root causes to prevent a child leaving their family or their home and help that family within the community and support, that would be ideal as well. And just a little bit more of foster care. Me being Native American, I always look at the Indian Child Welfare Act as well. So I know Susan always, says, hey, this is okay, or, she does a really good job of letting me know. I'm really just thankful that you're conscious of that as well. Because at the federal level, the Indian Child Welfare Act is at SCOTUS level, so it's threatened to be voted down as well. So it's something that in the Indigenous community we're very conscious of as well.
Can you explain that a little bit more? I've read just a tiny bit about that.
Yeah, so The Indian Child Welfare Act kind of stems from the historical of the United States government taking Native American children from their homes and putting them into boarding schools, such as the one in my district right now, Haskell Indian Nations University, which is now a college, but back in 1884 it was a boarding school, and it actually reached all the way to where my family originates from, the Arizona side. They had Navajo children as well, but then it came into, how do we make sure that Native children that do get into the foster care system, make sure that they don't lose that cultural piece of it. And that's what ICWA really tries to do, is tries to make sure a Native child is at least within their culture. So they do all they can at these court levels to place the child next of kin. And I've seen that in my own family when, unfortunately, I have cousins who entered the foster care system, just how difficult it is. So there's a big lawsuit kind of at this root core that folks feel like they don't have a say where the child placement is going. So I try to keep a close eye to respect ICWA in that way. And I actually introduced a bill to have a Kansas State ICWA, which is kind of what a lot of Indigenous legislators across the country are doing. But it wasn't the right path of solution because it was so closely tied to the federal ICWA. So if the federal ICWA gets struck down and that decision is predicted to come by SCOTUS in June, then the whole bill would have been for nothing. So we're kind of going to watch and wait and see, what's the next plan of action for next year.
So at least at the federal level, June is when you expect to hear something.
From SCOTUS, or from the Supreme Court Justice, to see if they will uphold ICWA or they will strike it down.
And then what's your plan?
So I've actually talked to a few of my Indigenous colleagues last week, and they were talking about how they just worked from the ground up and did the whole ICWA within their own state system. So someone like me who isn't well versed in the foster care system and our judicial system, that's going to take me a bit of time. I'm the only Indigenous legislator in our House and Senate too, so but luckily we do have Native American Affairs director in the governor's office, so we both try to work together with the 4 tribes of Kansas and all the stakeholders. So I unfortunately tried to do this within a month or two, and it's just the bigger issue that we need to all sit down and talk about and make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's.
All right. Again, we want to remind you that you have the opportunity to talk to our legislators this evening, whether you have a question about an issue or maybe you have a suggestion. We'll be glad to hear from you. You can call the numbers toll-free, 1-800-337-4788. Let's talk education. And that's, Susan, it's the biggest part of the budget of the legislature, right? The biggest funding part. Where do we stand? There's been a lot of back and forth about what should be funded, how it should be funded, and then special education has really come into play here.
Yeah, so a bill has passed that that fully funds K-12. We're still under the court requirement. That case is actually still open for another 2 years. Is that right? I think so too. I think it's 2 years. So yeah, it's fully funded. The issue that we have is that the education budget does not come through the regular process of coming through appropriations, and it gets tied into the way that this legislature is doing it, and the last couple of terms that I've served is they're tying the funding to different policy pieces. So we passed out a budget that had some policy that I didn't like, so I voted against the K-12 budget. But I'm hoping that since it's an appropriations bill, that the governor will have the opportunity to line item veto the policy pieces that I feel didn't really belong in it.
Can you be specific? What did you not like about it?
Well, the big thing so there's been 2 different bills, and the big thing I didn't like was the what's called the parent portal, and it just requires a lot of uploading of all the curriculum up front, and it all sounds like a good idea so that the parents can go online and look, But parents have contact with all of those teachers. If they want to know what they're going to be reading in the classroom, they can send an email or call and find out. We have, in my district anyway, we have great relationship between the teachers and the families. And in the rural area, we just don't have the staff to be able to upload that and to do all of that work. And so we're going to add something else for our teachers to have to do. So that's the main piece that I didn't care for. The other bill that we had that had to do with I call it the voucher bill. Is that it was a scholarship, what they called a scholarship that the money followed the child and could go to private schools. And that bill also had the special ed funding in it, which was the good part, but then it had teacher raises in it. And I'm not against the teachers having a raise, but that's local control in my opinion, that we don't need to interfere with what the school board decides to do as far as teacher raises. I voted against that one as well, primarily because we're sending funding to private schools and to homeschools that do not have any responsibility to respond back to us. And
they're not regulated as
in any way.
Public education is.
Right.
We should probably point out too, and Christina chime in here, that the special education, we're also talking about federal money here that, as I understand it, we're not getting. And I don't know if it's just Kansas and all the states, but certainly Kansas is not getting what we were promised, I guess, from the federal government. And there's this gap, and how do we fill that gap?
Yeah, I don't understand quite the process of federal and that line item. But, in my district, it really frustrates me, and I echo Representative Colcannon's that, I don't believe in giving public funds to private schools. And where I'm from, it's just quite frustrating to see these bills come to the forefront and not address the issues. And in my community, our school district is deciding to close a couple schools actually because we have a several $1 million shortfall in our budget. And I see these policies that come to the floor in the House, and it doesn't address that issue. And it's in the Senate, and currently with the one of the bills, it's in conference committee. So I tell people, we don't know if it's going to come out the way we brought it in. Hearing some chatter from senators that they don't like this and this of the bill. So we really don't know if we're going to get the same bill back. Is it going to be better, or is it going to be worse?
That's a frequent problem. Once we send something over to the Senate, we don't know what we're going to get back.
That's a good way to put it. This makes me think of U.S. Representative Tracy Mann was in Hayes and had a town hall meeting about 3 weeks ago, and that was something he talked about, was this bundling of bills. And probably, I can't imagine, I would think that'd be very frustrating as a legislator, whether it's at the state level or at the congressional level, where you're not voting on one single thing. These things somehow are allowed to be bundled together. Seems kind of silly to me. How do you ferret out what you really want to vote? And you vote against something that generally you approve of and your constituents do, but there are portions of it that it's like, no, we don't want to do it that way. So how do you rectify that in your mind?
It's one piece of legislation at a time. It depends on how much I hate the piece that's in there. And it also depends on where I think it's going to go from there. So those two pieces, the one that had the scholarship or the funding for private schools, that initially didn't even have enough votes to pass. And so we had to sit on the floor, and there had to be some people that were some arm twisting and talked into changing their vote to get enough votes for that to pass. So that one faces a lot of headwind, I think, to ever get all the way through the system. But that one has that special ed funding in it that we need. So we're hoping that it'll get packaged into a different way. The other one, it passed with a large amount of nearly veto proof. So that one, we'll see whether the governor has the opportunity to line item veto in those bills or not. But hopefully she will.
We might explain, this will be our government class this evening, what do we mean by line item veto exactly when it comes to the governor?
Well, so when we pass a bill, she has the option of either signing it, vetoing it, or letting it become law without signing it after a certain number of days. But it's the bill as a whole. When it comes to an appropriations bill, then she can cross out one line of it. If there's an expenditure that she doesn't approve of, then she can take that out. And by the same token, then we can come back and make an attempt to override that. If we have 84 votes for an override, we can put it back in. But that's what a line item means. It's basically when you're looking at the budget and taking out.
Does Governor Kelly have a history of doing that?
Yeah, she does. Yeah, we had 9 overrides of the vetoes last year, and 4 or 5 of them were from the budget. So yeah.
Let's remind you again that you're invited to participate this evening. We encourage you to call if you have a question or a comment of our legislators this evening. Again, it's a toll-free number, 1-800-337-4788. Christina, I thought I'd come back to you with some legislation that was discussed earlier this week and has been in the news because it's somewhat controversial. The House Bill 2313 requiring emergency care infants born alive during abortions, and as I understand it has been sent to the Senate. But as we know, Kansans voted overwhelmingly to affirm the constitutional rights to abortion back in August of 2022. And you actually spoke about this too. Mm-hmm. You came out. Tell us a little bit about your position on this.
Yeah, so the bill, this is already federal law since 2002. So this is just basically adding the criminalizations to Kansas statute. But what's really concerning is that the situation of the bill, these are unfortunate things that happen during a woman's pregnancy, but it's when a woman decides to seek an abortion and for reasons the baby comes out with heartbeat, and I believe there's definitions in the bill, muscular movements, signs of life, and then we're hearing testimony that unfortunately the baby might not be rushed to emergency care during this abortion process. And then we're hearing just other stories too that are quite sad and quite unfortunate. So this is a bill that we really wanted to make sure that we did our due diligence of, because this unfortunately does happen to a lot of women out there. And for me, Kansas said on August 2nd, 2022, that they don't want the legislature to continue to be making bills on abortion care. They want the choice. They want the freedom to choose. And to me, it felt like, if I was ever in that situation, and being Native American, my health care is federally health care. So, I also have that experience of, I can't do this and this and this with my governmental care through Indian Health Services. But with such a delicate topic, and circumstances can range from, one of my colleagues spoke that, one of the high mortalities of pregnant women are through homicides and gunshot wounds as well. So, what we might have in our head of this bill addressing those circumstances might not be the best solution for each and every variable of circumstances. So I was hesitant of a one-size-fits-all. Mm-hmm. I do appreciate the intention of the bill, and I think it's very important that we treat every life as valuable and children as a blessing, but we don't know the circumstances of how the person may have got there in an emergency situation. So I believe that we should keep that freedom of choice for the family, for the mother, for circumstances. And this bill would actually say if you don't rush the fetus to a hospital right away, there's these felonies and chances of incarceration. So that is also looming on the heads of the physicians and healthcare workers, and doesn't leave room for palatable care if a mother and their family wish to choose to hold the baby for its final moments in life. And I also raised the question of, we're here in a rural area. What does that mean, say an emergency situation happens in a rural area where maybe your nearest OBGYN is 3 hours away? It doesn't specify, would it be ambulance transportation? Would it be helicopter transportation? And I get it that, it might seem insensitive to think about this bill through the financial lens, but I think we need to make sure we do our due diligence as legislatures to look at the issue at a whole level. And medical debt is definitely a high up there for folks. So these are real life issues, and just thinking, what are the consequences of this bill, and do we want to go that far? So I really cautioned the legislature of that, but it was a very emotional bill, and I appreciate legislators who shared their stories, and I just don't think this was the right step when Kansas said that we want our constitutional freedom of reproductive care, abortion care, and we don't want government, the Kansas legislature, specifically making these decisions for us.
It makes me wonder, we were talking a moment ago about the dire shortage of nurses, not just in Kansas, but across the nation, as I understand it. But it makes me wonder, bills like this, proposals like this, is there any danger that we might lose some medical personnel who are OBGYNs and who specialize in women's health care because they're concerned that they may be going to jail for something that they were taught in medical school?
Well, I would say abortion's already highly regulated, so I think they're quite used to, if they provide the abortion care and services, of making sure that they are within regulations. I think when you're making split seconds decision, every second means life or death, either for the mother or for the fetus. To have that looming over your head that, if you don't do the right thing in this moment, you may be sent to prison, is definitely not a thought that I would want my physician to have if I were to ever be in that situation. We want to make sure that we trust our healthcare providers, that they have done the schooling, they have done the teaching, and to help us make the right decisions in these times of crises.
Back to this concern about the lack of healthcare workers in the nursing profession specifically, and we talked about this, the information that came from KU Med. They were also talking about baby boomers, which I'm one of them, and we're aging, we're getting ready to retire, and that's, as you get older, you have more medical conditions. Is the state talking, Susan, about anything that can be done to get more people interested in nursing? Do we have any programs available?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about it. In fact, we had an interim committee to address the workforce shortage. They're talking to the colleges to make sure that, the degrees, that there's enough like nursing seats in their program to accommodate everyone who wants to get into the program. But it's a statewide issue, and it's, I think it really came home to roost with the legislature when we realized, looking at the budget for Larned State Hospital, that we are spending over $2 million a month, $2 million a month on contract nursing.
Oh my.
Yeah, so those are just, the temporaries that you bring in. We're hitting over, or nearly 50 million a year.
Wow.
So, I think that we realize that there's a problem and trying to address it through bringing up the younger, the next generation of workers, but it's an issue. You know, we've had a couple bills on telemedicine and how that can help the system and take, you know, some of that load off, and then using some robots. That's kind of the next generation thing to answer some of the calls. Yeah, it's been a little bit fascinating. You know, that's a few years out, but yeah, nobody has a single answer at this point, but we're addressing it and talking about it anyway.
We do have a listener, a viewer, who would like to express an opinion or ask a question. Judy is on the line from Concordia. Do you have, Judy? Go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to ask about Medicaid expansion. There are a lot of us here who really cannot understand why that it cannot come to the floor and be discussed and passed because so many people support it. Thank you.
Judy, boy, that's a hot topic. Medicaid expansion. Where do we stand on that currently, Christina? That's been discussed a lot.
I think there's been always several bills. Unfortunately, it's been political, and it's, you know, we have a Democratic governor, so it can sometimes look like it's a win for her, and unfortunately, it's just become this. If you're a Democrat, you support Medicaid expansion. If you're a Republican, you don't. And it's quite unfortunate. It's actually one of the main issues that got me into Kansas politics and wondering what is it? I have heard concerns of the financial reasons of maybe we can't afford it or we shouldn't rely on the federal government for that type of funding. But I have traveled, you know, to Dodge City, and I've traveled to Kansas City and down south to Wichita, and everywhere we go, they want Medicaid expansion. I also blame the Senate too.
That's a good thing to blame.
Oh, well, why are we blaming the Senate?
Well, the reason we're blaming the Senate is because we did pass it. And by the way, I'm a Republican that does support Medicaid expansion. And there's probably 20 of us that do, and maybe if we'd ever get to vote on it, there could be more. But we did pass a bill, and then the Senate sat on it and wouldn't ever hear it. I mean,
2019 was it?
Yeah, 2019.
So that was before my time in the legislature.
Yeah, it was kind of a fascinating strategic plan.
I remember that you say that. Yes.
Yeah, that we worked on, and we got it through easily. We got it through, and then the Senate sat on it, mostly because there was a senator that was working on what he thought was a better plan. And then the next year, when he had the opportunity to bring his plan, there was a significant amount of that was not acceptable to CMS. And so it was stripped down to basically what we had offered them. And at that point, they didn't have the votes anymore. So the Senate is a big holdup for it. But we do have some opportunities coming up that we've got some bills that could be germane for an amendment. And so that if that opportunity arises, then we can get a debate on the House floor. But as far as bringing a bill, I mean, Judy, I'm with you on this, that you can't understand why. It's a handful of people that are in leadership that are holding it up and holding up the opportunity for the vote, for the debate and the vote. And it's very frustrating, and I've been working on every workaround I can for about 10 years. And it's just like beating my head against the wall.
There aren't many states, remind me, that have not gone
right.
through Medicaid
The most
expansion.
recent, North Carolina just passed it.
That's right.
So I think there's 10 left, is all. And you know, Christina mentioned about taking federal funding. We take federal funding. If we're going to take all of that COVID money, then I cannot understand how anybody could, with a straight face, say we're not going to take federal money anymore. So that argument is kind of out, and there's incentive money that, and there is what we call the FMAP. It's the portion of that the federal government pays and the state government pays, and we get a better FMAP return with the Medicaid expansion, and so there are a lot of areas that the Native American healthcare is one of them. Prisoners, maternity care, all of those would get better percentage of FMAP if we would pass it. I have a whole notebook full of full of arguments. We could talk about that for a while.
Well, and you mentioned the federal monies or the COVID monies, and that's, as I understand it, kind of at a critical junction again, because that's going away, and people who were being able to utilize that money now, that fund is not going to be there any longer. So I know I've seen some news releases coming out from various agencies, state agencies and support groups talking about you need to figure out what you're going to be able to do. And many of those, of course, are supporting the expansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would have been a good year to expand it this year, but unfortunately it hasn't happened. But we do look for any kind of way, and they write bills to specifically make sure that we don't bring amendments or to be germane. So if you're watching, our House floor procedures are streamed on YouTube, and some of us do live tweet as well, #KSLeg. So you might see Medicaid expansion come to the House floor as an amendment like that, but so far leadership on both sides, I would criticize, have not had any bill hearings on.
Well, we'll keep our eyes and ears open then. Thank you, Judy, for your question. And if you have a question or a comment, again, call us toll free, 1-800-337-4788. Moving on to something totally different now, and not truly a state issue, although I did hear something about Utah earlier today. But we're hearing that TikTok is bad for the United States, and the CEO of that Chinese organization has been grilled. Is TikTok bad for Kansas? And the governor did issue some edict about state property not being able to use TikTok. Is that right?
Yeah, we passed a bill too.
Okay.
We passed a bill that state phones could not have TikTok and computers.
Yeah, of the state Wi-Fi, the governor actually signed an executive order, which basically the bill said the same thing, and put in statute, which I do not claim to be a professional in cybersecurity. So, I mean, I guess, but I don't have any quite strong opinions. I have a TikTok myself, and it's actually hindered my abilities to create TikToks to reach my constituencies, because I can't film and edit in the Capitol, and my office is in the basement, so I really rely on the Wi-Fi because of the limestone walls.
Sure.
It's really hard for internet.
She says the basement, but it's the garden level. It's not like we've stuck her in the basement. They're beautiful offices.
Yeah, no, by choice.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're very, very nice.
You like the garden level then.
I do.
It is interesting that you mentioned that. At my work, we were talking about whether we as news people should get into TikTok, and the Washington Post, which is a well-known, well-respected, long-time news organization, they have started that, which I didn't even know. Being an old person, I really have nothing to do or know about TikTok, but we were looking at the demographics, and it is geared towards young people, and that's really interesting that you're talking about. This hinders you in some ways of being able to connect with your constituents, and I would assume especially the younger ones.
Yeah, I've actually had a page last week whose mom found me on TikTok. So, if TikTok does go away, we will be hindering those opportunities to young people. And she came during her spring break, and she lived in Wichita, which was really cool because it reaches folks not directly in my district, and it even reaches out of our state.
Sure.
So people know what Kansas is up to. But I with the cybersecurity issues, that's definitely above my knowledge of scope. So I'm just like, okay.
We'll see what happens there. It also makes me want to bring up something related to you being one of the younger legislators, Christina. The perception that there are, and Susan, you before we came on air, you were talking about this kind of a gap in the ages of people who are serving in our state house and in our state senate. Retirees who, let's face it, have lots of time to do that, and then a few young people, but there's kind of this gap of people not being able to serve because they're busy living their lives and helping their families. So we're talking about a potential of paying legislators, and there has been a little bit of action on that.
Well, yeah, currently we receive $88.66 a day, and that's been the same for many, many years. I don't know the last time that was increased. So there was a committee that has been looking at modernization, and so they've appointed a committee of non-legislators to look at that, to look at the pay status and of not just the legislators, but the boards, the different boards that serve in the state government. That what they get paid is tied to what we get paid. So
these are like the volunteer boards of different agencies across the state. Is that what you mean?
Well, they're not necessarily volunteer if they're getting paid, but yes, that's what I mean. Like the BSRB, the state regulatory for social science. Those kind of boards that do a lot of work, that consistently work year round.
Uh-huh.
So, but the big thing is for the legislators, and we've thought for quite a bit of time now that we're missing out on a demographic there in their 30s and 40s who just can't afford to take off 3-4 months from their job and to earn $88.66 a day, and. So we're having some outside evaluation of what it would need to be in order to, we really need to attract really high quality people into this position. It's very important creating the laws in our state, and especially in today's world, the politics has become so extreme and polarizing that there are. When I campaigned it last summer, I realized there are a lot of people just like me who are common sense, middle of the road, moderate Republicans, but they can't afford to take time away, and so therefore we get the more politically minded people who are at a stage in life where they can afford to be there.
You're nodding your head quite a bit, Christine. How does Kansas compare to other states? Do legislators get paid in other states? Do you know?
I think only New Mexico does not get paid. They're all volunteer, but everyone else gets paid. And I can't remember what Kansas ranks as, but it was either the top 5 for lowest paying jobs, and we are part-time,
True.
which also impacts that pay too as well. But we answer emails, we do town halls, we talk to classrooms any day, all day of the year as well. And anytime we try to recruit, I'm sure it might be the same for the other side of the aisle, or if anyone out at home has asked their friends under the age of maybe 40, would you run for office? They would laugh at you and say, why would I want to make $88 a day and some change with our stipend when I'm making, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, and I am trying to build my career. We have a couple legislators who have young kids under the age of 5, and it just baffles me that we don't have a daycare in the Capitol as well. So a lot of their pay of what we make goes to childcare as well. There's a really interesting article that came out over the weekend that highlighted both Democrats and Republicans who are, in their early 30s, mid 30s, just trying to build their families and trying to make it work as well. For me, I do contract working, which is not quite ideal because last year, 2 years ago, I was able to get a job fairly close out of session. But last year, picked up a job, but did not get my first paycheck until about August, September. And I try to save as much as I can throughout the legislative session. But I found myself at my local food pantry, just trying to get healthy foods. So it's, it can be quite unideal, and I'm lucky that I only have myself to think of. I don't have kids. I have a supportive family that, if I ever need rent money, I can just, ask my support systems as well. But it could be quite a burden to take on this job.
What do you say to young people as you visit throughout the state who maybe are thinking about some issue was your instigation? What about other people? Do you encourage them to get involved, and what's your carrot?
So I would say, look at the legislature. I use this example. I got put on tax committee because I didn't know anything about taxes. So I was like, oh, this is going to be my my learning committee. And being on that committee, I realized there's a tone where it's, how do we attract retirees? And for me, I'm not, jumping in my seat for joy as a young person talking about tax policy for retirees who do deserve as well. But what can we do for young people and young families? And I don't think we've actually passed much legislation that excites me as a 28-year-old. So if it doesn't excite me, how is it going to excite that, recent graduate who's looking at 3 to 6 jobs and maybe one's in Kansas? I had a constituent tell me today, Christina, I could buy a house and get a higher pay raise if I moved to Colorado. I was like, whoa, it really puts into perspective that, we need to also tend issues to our growing families and our growing populations. I'm really excited that in the legislature we're talking about childcare a little bit here and there.
Yes.
I might not agree with the solution, but we're finally talking about an issue that I've heard throughout the state of, how do we keep young people here, and how do we attract young families to help grow roots in our state? And same for, it doesn't matter if you're urban or rural area, you need someone to watch and take care of the kids while you're at work.
That's a really good point. I was thinking about you a moment ago because you are obviously in Lawrence in a more urban area as opposed to Beloit and west of Beloit, which obviously is in the rural part. And how do you juggle those issues that are sort of dividing between rural versus urban, but then we've got others that are strictly Kansas issues, childcare being an excellent example?
Yeah, that's definitely one of those issues where we, like you asked a question of bundling bills, how do you make those decisions? Sometimes it's a vote your district type of bill, or, vote what's the best for Kansas in the future. So it's quite interesting, the thoughts that go in our head. For me, I really rely on my public stakeholders, my local stakeholders in my community. So for a lot of the education bills, I'm asking my local school board members and my local superintendent, and a couple parents here and there, how does this sound? Or bad. I was like, okay. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And I would say a lot of good legislation, if you look on our website, will pass with that bipartisan support. And oftentimes we're passing things with full bipartisan support. You're just probably reading a lot of the controversial issues that really divide us.
And I hate to sit here as a member of the media, but that's true. Unfortunately, I think it's kind of human nature to be interested in the bad things, but there is that bipartisan support a lot of times, and we need to make sure that we get that information out there, that people know there are lots of people like you who are middle of the road monitors. You did say, Susan, before we started though, that once redistricting occurred, you have picked up more of an urban area in a portion of Salina.
Yeah, I did.
Are you seeing a difference there between Beloit and the Salina?
I did when I was going door to door and having some conversations. Yeah, there's a difference between a community that is dependent on the ag industry, and then when I was going door to door in downtown Salina, I felt at home there. That's where I'm from, so it was kind of like a homecoming for me in a lot of ways, because the district is where my church is in that district, and the junior high I went to, and my best friend's house, and it was an area that I know really well. But there is a difference. Can I back up a second?
Go for
about
it, yes.
So talking about bipartisan and childcare, so in the rural area, a lot of smaller communities are working hard on this childcare issue. I think that we need to be, in the legislature, we need to be really careful to not swing the pendulum too far. Some of the barriers to what the smaller communities are doing are there's too many regulations. And so we have a Senate bill coming over that's really kind of scary, that it releases a lot of the regulation, kind of removes KDHE from it altogether, and takes away the ratio that between the adult and the number of babies, the number of infants, and the number of children. There are a lot of things that we need to slow down and really look at.
So that pendulum can go too far.
Yeah, it can. And there's a study going on with the Children's Cabinet that looking at our regulations and what needs to be changed in Kansas as far as child care, and that's due back in May. So if we could just hold off on creating change too quickly.
Thank you both so much for being with us this evening. We've been visiting with Representative Susan Colcannon of Beloit and also Representative Christina Haswood of Lawrence. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you for your service to the state of Kansas and your constituents. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Becky Kaiser. Good night.
In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains builds, operates, and maintains electric transmission infrastructure, connecting consumers to lower-cost energy sources to power our energy future. That means safe, secure, reliable electricity for those we serve. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.